What if I told you that that dense 30-page academic paper you've been avoiding isn't actually a wall of data? It's a perfectly engineered story.
Yeah, I mean, you know that feeling when you click on an article about some massive new scientific breakthrough. You decide you want to be a good digital citizen and read the actual source material.
Right, exactly. So you click the link, and suddenly you're staring at this tiny font, endless citations, and like paragraphs that look less like a narrative and more like a foreign language.
It genuinely is the academic equivalent of an impenetrable fortress. I
Hmm.
mean, most people, even highly educated professionals, they take one look at the formatting of a peer-reviewed journal and they just close the tab. The friction is just way too high.
Oh, totally. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if a research paper isn't just a dry, robotic data dump? Because whether you're, prepping for a corporate meeting, trying to parse a news headline about a miracle drug, or you're just insanely curious about how the world works, understanding how these papers are built is basically the ultimate cheat code for information literacy. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you here.
It's great to be here with you. And today our mission is to completely demystify the architecture of academic writing. We're unpacking a highly comprehensive textbook chapter on writing about research.
Yeah, it's a really deep source text.
It is. We're going to walk you through the entire life cycle of a research report, from the initial formatting and the very first introductory hook all the way to the final abstract. Because once you see the profound logical rhythm to how new knowledge is shared, you can extract exactly what you need from any study, like in minutes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before a researcher can even begin to tell their story of discovery, they have to know what language to speak. Which brings us to the rules of engagement. Style guides.
Ah, yes, the style guides.
Right. And I think a lot of people, myself definitely included, assume a style guide like APA, AMA, or Chicago style is just an overly strict grammar book meant to, torture college freshmen.
That is the most common misconception by far. I mean, style guides actually aren't handbooks of grammar or usage at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah, really. You can write a grammatically flawless sentence that completely violates a style guide, or conversely, a terrible, unreadable sentence that perfectly adheres to it. The true purpose of a style guide is to create invisible consistency.
Inviolable consistency, meaning like the reader shouldn't even notice it's there.
Exactly. Think about the mechanical minutia of writing. Should you capitalize academic degrees? Well, if you're writing in AMA style, the answer is yes when abbreviated, but no when written out.
Okay, that's incredibly specific.
Right. Or does a period go inside or outside the quotation mark? Do you use a serial comma? These are subjective choices. There's no inherent right or wrong answer in the universe. But if a researcher is constantly switching their formatting from page to page, it creates cognitive friction.
Oh, I see. So it's basically like setting a strict dress code for the paper so no one is distracted staring at your shoes. You want all the mental energy focused entirely on the ideas.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And once that formatting is out of the way, the researcher has to actually hook the reader, which leads to the introduction. And I loved the advice from the source material here. It practically begs the writer, please do not start your paper at the dawn of time.
Oh yeah, the dreaded lens of history opening.
It's the worst. Like, since the beginning of recorded history, mankind has wondered about, no. The textbook makes it crystal clear. Do not start with a wide generic lens. You want to start specific.
It gives this really great example of a study on childhood obesity, right?
Yeah. Instead of talking about like global health over the centuries, the researcher starts precisely by stating that childhood obesity is a major public health concern in the United States, and then immediately narrows it down to the estimated rates for children 6 to 12 years of age.
It respects the reader's time. I
Yeah.
mean, you're zooming right into the population of interest and the exact problem on page 1. And once that highly specific hook is established, the paper transitions into what is called the literature review.
Which is where you set the scene, basically.
Exactly. This is where the researcher provides context. The fundamental purpose here is to summarize existing scholarship, to show exactly where this brand new study fits into the ongoing academic conversation. It's also where you clearly define your key terms.
Which is so crucial because, let's be honest, academics absolutely love a good acronym.
Oh, they do. And they can't just assume you know them. The chapter highlights a concept called fear of cancer recurrence, or FCR.
Right, and to a layperson, that sounds totally self-explanatory, like you're afraid the cancer comes back.
But in a literature review, the researcher has to establish exactly what FCR means in the context of their specific field. They have to cite previous studies that define it as Um, a measurable level of clinical distress or worry, not just a passing thought. You have to lay this groundwork so the reader isn't making broad assumptions.
You know, it reminds me of walking into a dinner party that's already in full swing.
On dinner party.
Yeah. Like, you don't just kick the front door open and start yelling your own opinions at the room. You have to grab a drink, stand in the circle for a minute, listen to what people are already talking about, figure out the context of the argument, and then you can jump in with your new observation. That is a literature review.
That is a phenomenal analogy. I love that. You're acknowledging the scholars who've been standing around the dinner party talking about this topic for decades before you even arrived.
But I do want to push back on something here, because this has always bothered me. When you're reading a literature review and the researcher is citing all these past studies to build their case, I mean, if a study is published in a journal, shouldn't we just trust it?
That's a very common assumption.
Because the source material talks heavily about researchers needing to critically assess the old literature. But if it's already been peer-reviewed, why are we second-guessing it?
Because peer-reviewed does not mean flawless. It really doesn't. Peer-reviewed just means the methods were sound enough to be published. And this is a massive part of critical assessment. Researchers are actively trained to spot the weaknesses in the very studies they are citing to build their foundation.
Oh, so they're looking for holes in the foundation.
Exactly. For example, sampling bias is incredibly common. Let's say you're reading a study about human learning or memory, and it makes sweeping claims about how the human brain works. But when you critically assess the methods of that past paper, you realize the entire sample of participants consisted of college psychology undergrads who just volunteered for course credit.
Yeah. Which brings it right back to our daily lives. Like, if you're scrolling your feed and see a headline that says, coffee cures memory loss, you really need to check that literature review. Because if they only tested that on 19-year-old college students who are already hyped up on caffeine, that doesn't mean it's going to work for a 65-year-old retired mechanic.
Precisely. The generalizability, basically how well this study applies to the general public, is severely limited in that case. A good literature review doesn't just list previous studies like a bibliography. It evaluates their relative strength. And interestingly, it demonstrates this mastery primarily through paraphrasing.
Which was another huge surprise to me. I always thought if you wanted to sound smart in academia, you just drop a massive indented block quote from a famous scientist.
Actually, overquoting is a dead giveaway of an amateur academic writer. It looks lazy.
Wow, really?
Yeah. The golden rule of citations is that paraphrasing shows true understanding. When you synthesize someone else's highly complex idea into your own words, while maintaining a consistent tone with the rest of your paper, you prove to the reader that you actually grasp the underlying mechanics of the material.
That makes total sense.
You should save direct quotes only for times when the original phrasing is so unique or so historically essential that changing it would diminish its impact.
Okay, so the groundwork is laid. We've hooked the reader with a specific problem, and we've navigated the dinner party of past research, pointing out who has a weak argument. Now we move from theory to action. The researcher has to explain how they actually did their own study, the methods section. And, reading through our source material, I couldn't help but picture this as a massive culinary divide.
A culinary divide. Walk me through that.
Well, think about the two main types of research, quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative research is like baking. It is incredibly rigid. It requires precise measurements, exact chronological steps, and if you deviate from the recipe by even a gram of flour, the cake just collapses.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
But qualitative research, on the other hand, is like cooking a stew. You're tasting as you go, adjusting the seasoning, dealing with the context of the ingredients, and just adapting to the situation.
That completely tracks. It's a great way to put it. But let's look at the mechanism behind why that is. Why does the quantitative baking require such rigidity?
Right.
In a quantitative methods section, the researcher must detail highly specific chronological steps because the entire goal is replication. They have to list their exact variables and detail their ethical procedures, like getting Institutional Review Board or IRB approval.
So it's about making sure someone else can do it.
Yes. If another scientist in a different lab follows your exact recipe, will they get the exact same cake? If not, your math is flawed.
Right. It's about proving the formula works universally.
Exactly. The chapter brings up the General Social Survey, or GSS, on happiness.
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
It's this massive, meticulously maintained data set When researchers use it for a quantitative study, they can't just casually say, oh, we look at the GSS. They have to specify the exact cumulative data file they used, the years it spanned, like 1972 to 2014, and the precise number of respondents.
Which was huge, right?
Massive. In this example, it was over 59,000 people. They are spelling out the exact statistical threshold they use to define their groups.
But wait, if you're looking at 59,000 people, doesn't a sample size that massive just completely dilute the unique individual experiences of those people? Like you lose all the nuance.
Yes, and that is exactly the point of quantitative research. You are intentionally smoothing out the individual nuances to find the overarching mathematical trend. But if you want the nuance, you move to the qualitative cooking.
The stew.
The stew. Qualitative methods are eclectic because human experiences change based on the environment, and the researcher must adjust to the participant's context. The textbook notes that a qualitative researcher even has to explicitly state their positionality.
Positionality is fascinating. It's essentially the researcher putting their own background and biases right on the table, stating whether they're an insider or an outsider to the community they're studying.
And the mechanism behind why this is required is crucial for data integrity. Let's say an outsider researcher goes to interview a marginalized community about their healthcare practices. Because of historical mistrust, that community might withhold information or alter their answers.
Right, they might not feel comfortable.
Exactly. So if the researcher doesn't state their positionality as an outsider, the reader won't know that the data might be skewed by that dynamic. The chef's identity changes how the ingredients react.
The chef changes the stew. And you really see this stark divide between the two methods when you look at how they describe their participants. The source material has these two demographic tables that are basically night and day.
Yes, the quantitative versus qualitative participant tables.
In the quantitative example, it's a table comparing kids in traditional schools versus charter schools. And the demographics are purely categorical: age, ethnicity, and a literal checkbox for whether the kid gets a free lunch.
Very binary.
Super binary. It is cold, hard data meant for statistical comparison. But the qualitative example, it's a table detailing a small purposive sample of just 14 older adults, looking at the relationship between pet ownership and mental health.
And it doesn't just list their age and gender, does it?
Not at all. It lists their specific living arrangements like lives alone or lives with partner and exactly what kind of pets they own. One participant has a dog, another has 2 dogs and a cat, someone else has fish and birds. It paints this incredibly detailed human picture. Because if you're studying mental health, the daily subjective experience of living with a parrot is vastly different than living with a golden retriever.
It really is. And that brings us to arguably the hardest part of the methods section. Measures. It is one thing to measure a child's age or whether they get a free lunch. But how do you measure something that doesn't have a physical weight or length? How do you operationalize an abstract human emotion?
This is where I start to feel bad for researchers. Like, how do you even begin?
The chapter mentions something called the trait forgivingness scale. Think about forgiveness. It is an incredibly abstract, highly subjective concept. You can't put forgiveness in a beaker.
Right.
But a researcher needs to measure it to run their study. So they use a validated survey instrument, the trait forgivingness scale.
And it doesn't just ask, hey, are you a forgiving person? Because, I mean, everyone would just say yes.
Yeah.
It gives them specific hypothetical scenarios to gauge their reaction.
Exactly. By referencing this established scale in the methods section, the researcher is telling the reader, I am not just guessing how forgiving these people are based on a casual conversation. I am using a rigorous, historically tested tool to convert this invisible emotion into trackable data.
Turning the invisible into the visible. I love that. Okay, so the study is done. The recipe has been meticulously followed, or the stew has been perfectly seasoned. Because you followed those methods, we are now taking the dish out of the oven to see what we've got, the results and discussion sections. But I have to be honest here.
Oh.
When a paper transitions from the methods to the quantitative results, that's usually where they lose me.
It gets complicated.
It does. You turn the page and it's just a wall of descriptive statistics, standard deviations, and p-values. I feel like I need an advanced math degree just to know if the cake baked correctly.
And that is a totally fair reaction. It's incredibly dense. But you don't actually need a math degree. You just need to know what those tools are doing. When you see descriptive statistics, the researcher's just summarizing the basic features of the data. Standard deviation is simply a measure of how spread out the answers were from the average. Did everyone answer similarly, or were they all over the map?
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the p-value? and the null hypothesis? Because that sounds like pure jargon.
It is jargon, yeah, but the concept is actually pretty simple. The null hypothesis is basically the devil's advocate. It is the assumption that your results were just a random accident, that nothing special happened. When a quantitative researcher calculates a p-value, they are mathematically trying to reject that null hypothesis.
Rejecting the accident.
Yes. They are proving, with hard numbers, that their results were not a random fluke.
So because you baked with strict numbers, your results have to be defended with strict numbers. But qualitative results are entirely different. The data isn't a p-value proving it wasn't an accident. The data is the human experience.
Yes. The goal of qualitative results is to give voice to the participants. And the example the textbook gives for this is a study on complementary and alternative medicine.
Oh, right. In that study, the researchers are exploring why consumers continue to use alternative medicine alongside or instead of traditional medicine.
Right, and alternative medicine is a deeply personal, often trust-based choice. You can't just capture that in a spreadsheet.
So the results section uses block quotes. It uses actual transcripts of interviews with the participants, punctuated by the researcher's narrative tying the themes together. The actual voices of the people in the room are the results.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because just handing over a spreadsheet of p-values or a transcript of quotes isn't enough. You can't just drop the data on the reader's lap and walk away. You have to tell the reader what it actually means, and that happens in the discussion section.
The discussion is this so what? It is where the overarching meaning of the massive project is finally revealed. You restate your original hypotheses, you look at those numbers or quotes, and you explain the broader implications.
Bringing it back to the beginning.
Yes. You're taking the very specific, isolated findings of your study and weaving them back into that dinner party conversation you started in the literature review. You are finally making your point to the room.
But there is a part of the discussion section that has always baffled me, the limitations section.
The limitations.
Why on earth would a researcher spend a year on a project, secure funding, write it all up, just to include a paragraph at the very end saying, by the way, here's everything I did wrong? Doesn't that just invite people to tear your work apart?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, in academia, vulnerability is the ultimate flex.
The ultimate flex.
Truly. The more you point out your own flaws, the more bulletproof your study actually becomes to critics. Science is not about perfection. It is about transparency.
And the textbook gives a really raw example of this. It mentions a study evaluating a bilingual diabetes outreach program. And in the limitations section, the researchers flat out admitted that because many of the Hispanic adult participants were not completely fluent in English, they might not have fully understood the public health agents giving the intervention.
Right.
They confessed a major methodological weakness right there in the text.
And by doing so, they preempt the critics. If a critic tries to say, wait, language barriers might have skewed this data, the researcher can just say, I know, I already documented that.
Yeah.
They're putting a warning label on their own findings, saying use this data carefully.
Which is so refreshing.
It is. And more importantly, it tells future researchers how to design a better study, next time perhaps, by ensuring all public health agents are completely native speakers. Admitting limitations builds massive trust with the reader.
Vulnerability as the ultimate flex. I love that. All right, so the study is done, the results are calculated, the flaws have been laid bare. Now, how does a researcher package this massive undertaking so that someone like you or me can actually digest it quickly? We are entering the final phase, the wrapping paper.
Which invariably starts with revision.
Yes, and I have to laugh because the textbook basically says autocorrect is not going to save you.
It definitely won't. I mean, academic writing is notoriously dense. But the most practical advice the chapter gives for revision is a delightfully low-tech. Read the paper aloud.
Out loud, to an empty room.
Yes. Hearing the text auditorily exposes clunky syntax, endless run-on sentences, and logical gaps. When you read silently, your eyes naturally skip over mistakes because your brain knows what you meant to say.
Oh, that happens to me all the time.
Right. But if your mouth physically stumbles while reading a sentence aloud, it guarantees your reader's going to stumble in their mind.
It's such a good tip for literally any kind of writing, from a research paper to a work email. But the ultimate piece of packaging, the absolute best friend of the casual reader trying to survive the information age, is the abstract.
Oh, absolutely. The abstract is the heavily restricted, succinct summary placed at the very beginning of the paper. It's often capped at around 150 to 250 words. It is the elevator pitch of the entire research project.
And a good abstract is a work of art. The textbook breaks down this great example of a study on a community drug resistance program, or CDRP. It packs 5 essential elements into just a few sentences, almost like a movie synopsis.
Do you want to walk through them?
Yeah, let's do it. First, it hits the pitcher. Background: the program was funded 3 years ago by the city council. Second, the purpose: they needed to get the opinions of parents on the program's effectiveness.
Third is the method: they conducted qualitative interviews with the purposive sample of 36 parents.
Fourth, the results: the parents strongly supported the existence of the program, but actually knew very little about its specific day-to-day activities.
And finally, the conclusion: program directors need to massively increase parent involvement if they want to succeed.
Boom. You get the entire story, the background, the methods, and the takeaway in less time than it takes to drink a sip of coffee.
It's incredibly efficient.
So what does this all mean? It means that when you understand this architecture, why style guides remove friction, how the literature review navigates the dinner party, the underlying mechanisms of quantitative baking and qualitative cooking, the vulnerability of the limitations, and the perfectly wrapped package of the abstract, a research paper ceases to be an intimidating wall of text.
It really does.
It becomes a navigable map. You know exactly where to look for the information you need, and you understand exactly why the researcher put it there.
It makes the entire academic process feel deeply human. It's just people trying to share what they've learned with as much clarity and honesty as possible. And this raises an important question, something for you, the listener, to ponder after we wrap up today.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine if we applied this rigorous academic structure to our daily consumption of news and social media.
Oh, wow. That would be wild.
What if every opinion piece, every viral post, or trending video had to include a strict method section proving exactly how they sourced their information? And what if they were bound by a mandatory limitation section, forcing the creator to openly admit the flaws and biases in their own arguments before you are allowed to hit share?
That would completely rewire the internet. Imagine a viral tweet with a limitations section.
How would that change the way we interact with information and each other in our daily lives?
I love that thought experiment. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you see a link to a dense research study, don't run away. Open it up, read the abstract, check the limitations to see how bulletproof it is, and trace that story of discovery for yourself. Keep questioning what you read, and we'll see you next time.